Okay, we'll get started here. Thanks for joining Driving Decision Making with Energy Information Systems. I'm Hannah Kramer with Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, and we also have our featured speaker here, Kristen Perina with Stanford University. We're very happy to have her here today to share her experiences with Stanford and all the great work they've done in implementing EIS on their campus. So I'm the technical lead for the Smart Energy Analytics campaign. We also have Elliot Crow on the line. He's going to be helping field questions in the Q&A process, so please get your questions in. I'll show you in a second how to do that. So here's what we'll cover today. I want to give a brief overview of the campaign and a little bit of level set on what is energy management and information systems and what is monitoring-based commissioning, so we're all on the same page with those terms. There's lots of terms out there. And then we'll have Kristen share with us about what they're doing at Stanford, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So please get your questions in the chat button at the bottom of your screen. All right, so first off, we have tools and a process. So EMIS, Energy Management Information Systems, are tools that are used in the monitoring-based commissioning process. These tools have a variety of different functions, and in this particular webinar, we're going to be focusing on what's here in the red box, which are Energy Information Systems and Advanced EIS. So this is in the meter level EMIS track, which is looking at all sorts of meter data from whole building to sub-meters, but really often this is for campuses or where you're going to want to benchmark against buildings against each other. And you'll see that Stanford has lots and lots of meters to manage, and so their system has been very helpful in this. What differentiates benchmarking and monthly utility bill analysis from an energy information system is that energy information systems are at least hourly data or more frequent. Advanced EIS also include more advanced analytics, oftentimes predictive models, so you can predict what energy use you would use on a particular hour of a particular day and compare it to current usage and flag anomalies there, kind of as a real-time look at your energy use relative to expectations. So that's the meter level side in a nutshell. System level EMIS we also cover in the Smart Energy Analytics campaign. We actually have a whole fault detection and diagnostics peer group series. And on the system level side, we're looking at building automation system data and how to flag faults by looking at those detailed data points in your system level to the zone level or central plant. So we're not going to go over the system side today. So you use these tools in the monitoring-based commissioning process to collect the data. It's an ongoing process of using the analytics to flag what's going on. A lot of times these problems aren't very apparent unless you have the data available to look at. So they help you in your energy management program. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Smart Energy Analytics campaign, I'll take just a minute here to go over. The goal of the campaign is to support increased owner adoption of these technologies. There's plenty of the technologies out there, but there's lots of hurdles as well to implementing them. So we do this by supporting new EMIS implementations and also existing ones or expansions. And we have technical support in 3 areas. We have one-on-one technical support, which we tailor to each individual organization. We have webinars and peer groups. And we have online resources and case studies on our website, which are available for everyone. We also have an awards program and recognition where we recognize organizations that are really doing a great job. We give them some press about the work that they're doing, and we have annual awards that we publicize. From a research perspective, what we get in return is a lot of information on how the industry is using EMIS, what's going on, and we pull all that data together, and annually we publish a report and make it available to the public on costs and benefits and measures implemented and all sorts of different types of really good findings about what's going on in the industry. So we do have our latest Year 2 webinar. I'll show you where that is in a second. We have 77 organizations representing over 400 million square feet participating to date. Excuse me. And there's still time to participate, so you can join at any time. And this is our last year, so we're really trying to get people joining by this spring so that they can be in the cycle of the last campaign year. All right, so we had recognition this fall and had really 3 great organizations to recognize. Stanford was one of those, and therefore we're having this webinar for them to share what they've done. So these were in new installation category where they've installed in the last year. In the spring we have best practice, innovation, and energy performance categories. So it's just different categories in the spring. And in the fall, we also have a monitoring-based commissioning provider recognition, where these providers have supported multiple campaign participants and really have brought NBCX squarely into the way they do their business. So we recognize them for that. For each organization that wins one of these awards, we write a 2-page success story. This is Stanford's. You can see at the bottom here, we have a website that lists all these success stories. They're a really good way to share nuggets of information about what people are doing, and you can kind of find someone who's similar to your organization and supports your business case. We have 17 success stories to date, and these are our 17 award winners to date. You can see a variety of types of buildings. So, we hope you'll look through their success stories on our website, where there's also a lot of wealth of resources and templates and so forth to support what you're doing. And in joining the campaign, we can help you use those kinds of things. Again, our deadline to join the campaign to be eligible for the spring award cycle is end of February 2019. All right, and then finally, I had mentioned the research report. On our website, you'll find a webinars tab, and we had the Year 1 research report, and the Year 2 is also on there now in the slide deck version. So feel free to go find that, and there's also a recording of the last webinar where I went through the results of that. Okay, so without further ado, I forgot. I was going to share with you one tidbit from the research. This is a pretty cool graph we like to show. I'll explain it because there's lots of lines here. We take every organization, their annual energy use by fuel prior to installation of EMIS, and then each year after. So you'll see some organizations have had their EMIS installed longer than others. 4 in our data set have been installed for at least 4 years. And each year we obviously add another year to this data set and get this line grows longer, and we see what kind of slope it has. So what we're seeing here is that the first year people are getting up and running. As a whole, on the median, they're getting about 4% savings, although you'll see some have much higher. And then over time, 11%, 13, 19. So we see that upward trajectory, and we continue to get more data to kind of bolster what this is saying, and we're also separating out the meter data side, so the EIS versus the FDD in our research report. So you can see that in the reports, and definitely reach out to us if you have questions. That's just a little tidbit there. Okay, so now on to Kristen. I want to make sure you see the Q&A button. Make sure you type your questions early so that we have those in the queue, and Elliot's going to organize them at the end when we start the Q&A. Okay, so I'm going to turn over to Kristen. She's a Sustainability and Utilities Manager at Stanford on the residential and dining enterprises side. So there's the research side, and then the residential and dining enterprises has a huge amount of real estate. So she's going to talk to you about the breadth of what they're doing there.
Hi, I hope you can hear me. Good morning. As she mentioned, I'm Kristen Prina. I'm from Stanford University, and I oversee about a third of the campus. For those of you who don't know, Stanford is one of the largest residential campuses in the country. It was our founding mission that students have a live-on experience at Stanford. So we have 315 buildings on campus that are dedicated just for housing and feeding students. So I oversee those buildings in terms of energy, water, waste, everything utilities and sustainability related. And then I also oversee a number of spaces off campus where we lease apartments for students while we build more housing for them to live on campus. So it's about, overall, it's about a third of the campus. So we're almost like a little city with soon to be 16,000 students living in this area. So we completed implementation of our system about a year ago. So we just hit kind of our year anniversary of being able to fully utilize it. It took us about a year to actually implement it. And then now we've been actively using it for about a year. This is kind of the snapshot of what we all included in it. We ended up selecting through a competitive process using Lucid's Building OS tool. And we have 443 buildings in there. That includes all of our active buildings, all of our buildings that were demolished within the last 10 years. So we wanted to make sure that we could historically look at our usage, and so we included historical usage information for up to 10 years. So any buildings that we had within the last 10 years, even if they were demolished, are included in the system. You can look them up similar to any other building. And then any of our leased or spaces off campus are in here as well. So total, we have, you can see about 6,000 bill meters in there. So this is where we get our monthly billing data. And then we have almost 1,500 interval meters, so where we're getting either daily or 15-minute interval points coming in that support those various buildings. And some of them are through automatic integrations. So some of them, the data is feeding automatically from the providers such as PG&E or Stanford Utilities. But some of these meters, which I'll talk about, are also manual meters where I'm actually uploading information to, because we haven't gotten together a good automatic integration for them, and you'll see why in my later slides. It's kind of, some of them are not traditional or data sets, I guess I would say. So I'm going to start by telling you a few ways that we are using the system, or we have over the last year, kind of the priority ways, and then I'll talk about what we hope to do with it in the future, and then lastly, how we got started for those of you who are looking at trying to do a similar system. So very high level, the first and foremost way we wanted to use it was to understand how we were meeting budgets, our overall, how we were predicting usage to set future utility budgeting by area and by building and by the different funding sources on campus. And so we imported all of our budget information from Oracle. Oracle is what we use for our financial management system, into Lucid, so that our senior level managers and also myself could see on a monthly basis kind of how we're tracking against budget. So that was one of the first priorities for the system, is we didn't really have a way where it was transparent across the organization, how we were tracking against what we had budgeted for utilities, and then what we were predicting would be our usage across the utilities. So this is just kind of a screenshot of what our housing senior leadership would see in terms of how they tracked against electricity, hot water, natural gas on a monthly basis. So they can kind of easily tell in the first quarter if they're off or under, and kind of work with me to make adjustments or change the model. Another thing that we did very early on, as I was rolling it out to various stakeholders, was to think about how they would want to view the utility data. So one of the first things we did was bring it to the dining managers. And the dining managers, we have 8 major dining halls. We serve millions of meals annually. And I was trying to get them to understand the impact of their, obviously energy and water usage behaviors, and they had never seen this data before. And I wanted to make it seem relevant and, close to heart for them. So what we ended up doing was actually uploading all of our meal data for all of those dining halls into the program as well. So it wasn't they were just looking at electricity or water usage. They were actually looking at it per meal that they produced in their facility. And this really got their attention. It wasn't just, your electricity usage went up by X and this is what you used, but this is actually the cost per meal of your water usage, or this was the cost per meal of your steam or your natural gas. And so you can kind of see on the right here, this is the view that the dining manager now sees. So for instance, in this particular dining hall, the cost per meal for water is 11 cents. And overall, for the first time, we were able to see that on average, the cost of every meal we serve, utilities is about $1, a little over $1 of every meal we serve goes towards just utility expenses. So it kind of makes them think about utilities differently, and even the meals they make and how they make them a little bit differently. And it also kind of being able to incorporate the meal data from Oracle as well kind of opened my eyes to the different types of data you could pull into the system to help explain and understand utilities usage. Because really what I realized after this was a meter can really be anything. So we think as utility managers traditionally about a meter being an energy meter or a water meter, a sub-meter for some kind of equipment. But really the way data is treated in these systems, you can import data for anything. Anything can be a meter. So in this case, we have breakfast, lunch, and dinner are a meter for this building, for each of the dining halls, similar to their other meters. And we're starting to incorporate lots of different data sets kind of in that way to get this view. Another thing that you would imagine you'd want to do first is kind of understand the impact of operational changes. So all of the time across our organization, students are asking us, can you stay open later? We want pizza at midnight, or I get up at 6 a.m. and I want my breakfast then, or can you offer some kind of expanded menu, or can these common spaces be open longer? And decisions are made very quickly. We want obviously our students to be happy, and so we're very quick to expand services or want to help them achieve success. So my management is usually very quickly to say yes about these things, but we don't often think about the utilities impact of longer operational hours or changes in menu, for example. And so this is one example where we decided to expand a dining program for our athletics program in a specific dining hall called Branner. It used to close at 7, and they opened this new high-performance dinner program from 7:15 to 9 p.m. because athletes felt like they didn't have a good food option after they were done with their practices and work. And so it ended up creating an additional 2 hours of dinner prep, serving, and cleanup, all that stuff. And what we were able to see in the system was actually on the left here, we're able to track easily that the expanded hours increased meals by 28%. And we were able to see easily what the impact that was on utilities usage, so that extra 2 hours of service per day increased meals by 28%, but look over here what it did to utilities usage. So electricity during that same period went up by 26%, hot water usage during that same period went up by 85%, and we can kind of see in the months in which it went over. And so as they look at expanding this program to other dining halls, we're able to offer this information and insight into, it's not just about that. It's also we need to start budgeting for these increases. This is what you're going to see if you start expanding those programs. So, it's been useful to help visualize those operational changes. Another thing that's been great for the system is we do a lot of behavioral change research at Stanford. I host between 17 to 25 interns every year that are doing some type of research on messaging. Will this message or this message, cause a behavioral change? Or if we email something compared to, put up a poster or talk to a person in person, what is the impact of those different methods of communication? If we install this kind of shower head from this kind of shower head, does it change behavior in the shower? So we're constantly doing that every year with academic departments and student interns kind of researching various initiatives and having access for the first time to real-time data. We can actually see from one day to the next or one week to the next the impact of those messaging strategies or the signage strategies and those types of things. So this is one example of during winter break, which is typically mid-December through the first week of January, all undergraduate students are required to leave campus. They're not allowed to stay in their housing. But graduate students are allowed to stay in housing because some of them continue research during winter break. And so we do a huge push to encourage students as they leave to turn off their heaters and unplug their electronics, close their windows, turn off their lights, all of that good stuff. But because it's such a short period of time, we've never really been able to understand what the impact is of our efforts to get students to turn down. So this last year we finally had access to real-time data so we could actually see the day that students move out and the day that students move in and what difference our efforts made. And last year we actually saved $34,000 during just this 3-week period and had pretty significant reduction in electricity and hot water usage. You can see the numbers up here. In our buildings because of this campaign, and we were able to use Lucid to kind of show that it was actually because of our efforts. So the ways that we looked at it to better understand it was these are what the real-time data graphs look like via Lucid. But we were able to compare. This top chart shows this last year's winter break. So the first line, students moved out. That's when they had to leave the buildings, and then you have Christmas and New Year's. And then the second line is when students returned for the January winter quarter. You can see in the bottom chart, that was the year prior. So you kind of see the before and after. It's all pretty much the same, right? There were actually no students living there between the black lines, but there was no energy or electricity reduction here. But you can see in the top chart very clearly that after students moved out, they responded to the messaging. We emailed them, we went door to door, and you can see very clearly that they responded to the messaging and turned off their buildings. Another example of this was when we started this campaign, students said, "Oh, we can't make a difference. When we leave the buildings, unplugging something's not going to make a difference." And we were able to show students for the first time, once again using Lucid, that they can have a big impact. So the chart on the top left actually shows the fall right before students move in, what an empty building looks like. So when the building is completely empty before students move in, we're working at around 150 kilowatt hours is kind of the baseline for that building. And what we were able to show in the bottom right chart is that during winter break, which you see that dip, it returns to that dotted line baseline, so that students are actually able to achieve the empty building consumption levels just because of their behavior change as they move out. So it's been powerful to be able to show them this, to see the impact of their behavior for the first time. Another interesting example was the difference we were able to look at between undergraduate and graduate housing. So on this previous slide here, this was an undergraduate dormitory where they had to leave the buildings. But this is actually a graduate building where they didn't have to leave. And we assume a lot of graduate students still leave during winter break to see their families or whatnot, but some can stay. And so we did the exact same messaging that we did in undergrad with graduate buildings. And we were surprised to see this is one of the complexes, and you see no change here. This is hot water usage or heating usage, and there's no change. And so when I first looked at these charts, I thought to myself, well, maybe the students didn't leave. They weren't required to leave. Maybe the majority of them stayed during winter break. But the electricity usage told a different story. And this is the same building's electricity usage. You actually see the dip where students had left for break. And so as we like to do with all of everything's a study, we had to ask ourselves, what about our messaging, or what did we do where, grad students, turned off, got the electricity turned down message, but didn't get the heating turned down message. How can we tailor or change our messaging? What did we do wrong where they got one side of the communication but not the other, and why was it different between graduate students and undergraduate students? So this has been fun. Another way that we used it once again during winter break is I submitted work orders actually to have a number of buildings just completely turned off where I knew we could turn them off. And my maintenance department said everything was turned off, and they confirmed for me that all the work orders went through. But as I was looking at our energy savings, I was able to see, you can see in the left that this building called Norcliffe was turned off, and this building on the right, Meyer, was not turned off. And so my maintenance department reported to me that they were turned off, and I have so many buildings, it's not really practical for me to go around and physically go see if these buildings are turned off. But I trusted that the work order was followed through on. And historically, I had to trust that, and I had no, other tool to tell me otherwise. But now I can, see very clearly that one work order occurred and the other one did not occur. And so I'm able to use it as a kind of an accountability tool to make sure that, as I, submit work orders for hot water set points to change or, buildings to be turned on and turned off, that it's actually occurring, so we can actually get the savings that we are hoping for. One last interesting example from this winter break, we just collected and learned so much from this last year, is the difference between staff and student turn down. So, what is the impact of staff behavior versus student behavior? And so we actually looked at two different facilities, one where we really depended on the students to turn down, and one where we really depended on staff to turn down the buildings during winter break. So the bottom example is Stern, and this is the one where we depended on students to turn down their buildings. So they achieved a 45% reduction in electricity usage by unplugging and turning off, and they achieved a 24% hot water reduction. But when we look at Wilbur, where we depended on staff, staff only had access to the common spaces. So we saw a much lower reduction in electricity usage. But what we see is on the hot water side, they had an equal amount of control over the heating. And so from a heating perspective, we kind of got a similar outcome. It didn't matter whether it was staff or students. We could kind of achieve the same outcome. But as it relates to electricity usage, we're heavily dependent on students. So other ways in the first year we've really been using the tool is to validate investment decisions. So in 2015, as an example, Stanford opened its new central energy facility. If you ever have a chance and you're over here to tour it, I highly recommend it. It's a really amazing state-of-the-art facility that reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 64%. You can see on our potable water usage by 18%. But the first thing my management asked me when we got this tool was, are we actually seeing the financial savings and the efficiency that we were supposed to see from the plant coming online as a stakeholder in campus? Are we actually seeing the benefits from it? We invested in this project, millions. It was like a $300 million, $400 million project or something like that. Is it paying off? And so I used Lucid as a tool to kind of show the before and after. So you can see on the top charts here, this is when we were under steam before the plant. Our last year under fully steam, we were spending about $1.3 million on steam, and we were using 71 MBTU. And then the bottom charts you can show the first year after the new plant went into place. You can see our usage almost got cut in half. So the same exact buildings, went from, on average using 71 MBTU to 46 MBTU. That's how much more efficient the plant was for us. But you can see our costs on the left-hand side actually went up. So we're using almost half as much energy, but our costs have now gone up by whatever that is, 30-35%. So important for my management to see how their investment paid off on one side, but that we're still helping to pay for the plant and how that will change over time. Another project which we tracked in here, there was many, but students have knobs inside of their rooms to control their heat, and we recently retrofitted a large 600 student dorm complex to give them knobs to be able to control their heat, and there were certain energy savings associated with those knobs. And what we saw the first year after we installed the new convectors with the new knobs is we didn't get any energy savings. So this bottom chart right here shows you the year after we installed this wonderful new convectors, new windows, new lights in this building, the hot water usage actually went up by almost at 1%, which isn't a big deal. But after we invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in this project, we would have expected some level of savings. And as we kind of dived into it and we interviewed students, we found that one, a lot of them didn't even know that the convector had a knob, and then if they did know it had a knob, they had no idea what the numbers or symbols meant on the knob or what they should do with the knob. And so we had student interns go through the entire complex and put these educational stickers on every single convector that very bluntly says, this knob controls your heat. 0 is off, 3 is recommended, 5 is what 5 is. And there's actually like a little star on the knob, and everyone thought that that was air conditioning, which we don't provide air conditioning in our climate, so that helped with a lot of confusion. But so after these were in place for a full year this last year, and we were able to see actually through Lucid that these, I probably spent a few $100s on these stickers, and our hot water usage went down by 20% in the building after those were installed. So very small educational efforts, we were able to see kind of the impact of that. So another thing that we did this year, I'm kind of going to move on to where I was talking about earlier in terms of incorporating non-traditional data sets, is Lucid just launched a new tool for work orders and assets, and kind of integrating with whatever you currently use as your work order management system. So we have a live integration right now with our work order management system and asset system called IBM Tririga. So every week it sends over a file with all of our work order data for that week. And this has been really cool and eye-opening because for the first time in one platform, a building manager can see both their utilities information as well as their work order and asset information. And also, IBM Tririga hasn't really its reporting capabilities and visualizations aren't as strong as Lucid. So a lot of our maintenance managers have a difficult time kind of viewing high level, what happened in a given set of buildings, or month by month, what are we spending on labor versus parts. And so, Lucid's kind of giving them that visualization for the first time. And then for us, it's really starting to give us a look at what is the relationship, is there one, between work orders performed in a building and energy or water usage. So this is kind of the large high-level graphic that you're able to see that shows, here we just started the data flow towards the end of July. So far we have almost 40,000 work orders already in the system, and you can see below kind of how they're categorized. So it'll tell you what building the work order was in, what was the problem, the work task ID to link it back, who was assigned to it, what the status is, and then what the total cost is. And that total cost is broken up, like I mentioned, by labor and parts, so you can see how the money is flowing. Another data source that we've incorporated is our waste data. We actually get data daily on how full our dumpsters and carts are for compost, recycling, and landfill, and then also our monthly service levels. So we're tracking all of that in Lucid as well. through uploads and spreadsheets. So one of the questions that Hannah said make sure you cover, which is a really good one, is how do you ensure data accuracy? Obviously, there's hundreds of thousands of data points that are going in here from those 1,400 real-time meters and then the 6,000 bill meters. And how do we ensure that the information we're getting out is accurate? And we use this app. It's called Data Quality. There was a couple different things we do, but this is probably the primary one that I really rely on. And what it does for me is, let me click over here. It'll actually show every single meter and how complete the data is for that meter. So it will tell you the very first date and time of data you have for that meter, and then the very last date and time you have for that meter. And then it will tell you how much of that data between those two periods are missing. And so for all of my 6,000 billing meters and 1,400 real-time meters, I can see them all in here, and I can see on the left-hand bar, it's a little small probably for you on your screen, but it'll tell you the percentage complete. So whether it's 100% complete, you have no missing minutes or days or months, all the way to everything's missing if you have a new meter that you just put in and only put in 1 point or something like that. So I check this very frequently, and I even, right after we installed the system, I actually hired somebody part-time that actually just, their sole job part-time was just to go through the data quality finder and help me fix all the gaps that we had as we initially uploaded all of the data into the system. So we had to go back to utility providers, to find a few missing days, or we had to, sometimes there were date issues where there was 1 or 2 days that were overlapped, or one day that was missing, and it was pretty clear that it was just like a billing calendar date issue. So we had to go through and fix all of those and fill in holes so that we make sure our reports are correct. But this was a useful tool for that. So once you see something's 96% data complete, so you have a few days missing or a few months missing, you can then click on it and it drives into that where that is. So this is electricity meter at a building called Crothers, and I was able to use the data quality finder to find this gap. Which once again, when we talk about the number of buildings and meters and 10 years of data, I can't on a monthly basis be going into each one of these and finding these. So having a tool that helps you collect the problems to fix is invaluable. So this one shows the data gap, exactly where it is, and then you can go right there and edit it to fill in the gap, which is super helpful. Moving on, one other useful thing that we've worked with for the last year is the building groupings, and I'm going to get into in a minute kind of how we got started with the system and how we got it approved. But one of the things that I never really realized when I was setting up the system and how important it was how our buildings and building groupings were set up, because once again, we have, you saw the 463 buildings, and you want to make meaning of all of the data. So all of these buildings are managed by different people, different regions. They have different types of occupants. They're funded in different ways. And then just the building themselves in terms of their vintage, how old they are and how they're constructed is different. So for all of those different characteristics, you can create a different building group so that you can look at information differently. So when we're trying to understand let's just say, electricity usage, it's interesting to look at how do freshmen compare to seniors in terms of electricity usage. How do undergraduate dorms compare to graduate dorms? Another fun one is how do building managers compare? So do certain building manager regions tend to perform better than other building manager regions? The questions are kind of endless, but the importance of setting them all up and setting them all up correctly takes a lot of time, because you can imagine, I obviously couldn't fit these all on the screen, but I think we have over 30 different building groups. But as I'm trying to answer questions, or a student asks me a question about our facilities, being able to pull up those individual building groups easily is really important. And so my space administrator was just as active in developing this tool as I was. He set up all of the square feet, occupancy, building locations, all of that kind of location core data, and then also all of these building groupings. He actually helped set up all of these, and he actually helps me maintain it. So anytime a building name changes or a building manager region changes, or we get we want to look at groupings in a different way, he helps me keep this all updated. Another fun one I should mention, Hannah and I were talking about yesterday, was the difference between new construction and our existing buildings. So she asked me, does your new construction perform better? And using building groupings, I'm able to group the vintage of buildings and kind of show what we were able to actually show to my management is actually our new buildings do not perform as well as our existing buildings. And we tout them for being very inefficient, but what's been interesting is how it's changed over time because programming has changed. So you look in some of our old dorms and the amenities for a student are basically your box room, your bathroom, maybe a tiny kitchenette, and maybe a tiny entryway. And the new dorms have huddle rooms and maker spaces and computer clusters and all of these amenities that the older dorms don't have. So not only has the amenities per student changed, but also the volume, the sheer size of the buildings have changed. So where the old ones, maybe you have an 8-foot, 9-foot ceiling, the new dorms have a 10-foot, 11-foot ceiling. So the usage per student is significantly higher in new buildings compared to existing buildings. And it's been very informative for my management to see that because we think we're building efficient buildings and we're putting the latest and greatest in them, but when it really comes down to it, because of the programming and the just increase in sheer space, they don't perform as well on a per student basis. And then, how do we think about that as we're designing, the next level, and what does that mean about equity as well across, students across the campus, and what, one student might have access to in one dorm compared to another. But it's been interesting to see. You wouldn't expect that. And this is just, a benefit, once again, of all of these building groupings. So this is just a viewpoint from one building manager area being able to compare just his buildings against his buildings and kind of seeing changes over time just in his set of buildings, the power of groupings. Another question that got asked me for people who might be getting started is where did we start? So this whole project actually started a long time ago in 2012. It was kind of identified as a hot priority for us because of our spend on utilities is so high and our vast number of buildings. We were actually managing I actually shouldn't even say we were managing. We were putting all of our data into a system called Utility Manager Pro. It's kind of ancient. I don't even think it's updated anymore. I don't know if anyone uses it. But only 2 people had access to our utilities data, just the 2 people that were inputting it into it. And the reporting was horrible. It was just like kind of spit something out in an Excel spreadsheet, and you didn't really trust what came out of it. And so we weren't able to do, obviously, all of the great things that I just talked about. So I brought to my management this vision, which was essentially what we're all trying to do, which is to achieve data-driven decision-making to drive behavior and cultural changes across our occupants and reduce our expenses. So how did the question to me was, how did I get my management to get behind this and understand why it was important and invest in it? And I showed them things like this, which was obviously how our utility expenses were changing over time. They're just going up. Our costs for energy, water, waste are ever increasing. But I also showed our cost per capita, and despite our population not increasing very much, our usage is increasing almost at the same rate as our expenses, even though our population isn't changing. But the really driver, I think, in getting my management to invest in it was actually showing them this chart, and I also had some supplemental information that went along with this. But I looked at our overall expenses and what we spent on analytical or software tools to help us manage them. So this green, the dark green, is basically the percentage of the budget. And we were spending essentially almost $3 million on software tools that in some way or form manage that portion of the budget, almost $3 million. And just to give you an example, this can be anything from like an employee time clock. So we have a software tool that manages our BU staff clocking in and clocking out to we have another program called Vizex that manages the screens that you see in buildings that show information for folks. So the software tools are vast, but we were spending $3 million on these, right? And we were only spending barely $2,000 on our Utility Manager Pro system, which wasn't great, as I mentioned. So what I showed them was for the amount of money utility is of our budget, the equivalent license spend would actually be almost $300,000. So we were only spending $2,000 on software tools to manage that portion of our budget, but we were spending $3 million to manage the other portion. So if we wanted to provide similar analytical management, it would be almost $300,000. So this was kind of eye-opening for them. I don't think they realized the lack of support that was being given to this large expense for the organization. And I actually broke down by software tool how much that software tool cost for implementation, how much the license that software tool was, and then how much of the budget it was actually managing. And so it was just very striking and very obvious that we needed support to manage this large piece of our budget. And then the lastly convincing factor was just transparency, right? We only had 2 people really that had access to our utilities data. And once a year kind of a report was being done, and basically now everybody's a utility manager, right? So all students can have access to it, all of our staff, custodians, maintenance professionals can play with the data. And so obviously when you have transparency, you have more accountability and more people kind of actively working to help us reduce it. So finally, how did we do? So our goal when we pitched this to my management, we pitched it saying that we would achieve 10% energy savings by 2021, and that would give us about a 2-year payback. So if we did achieve these savings, we would get our monies back in 2 years. And so after the first year of implementation, how we did is on the right. So in terms of energy, so these were our savings, and we saved between 5 to 8% in the different commodities. So we still have 2-3 years to go, but obviously we're already well underway. But we still have a lot of work to do because a lot of the things we did to achieve these savings were very behavioral and operational. Our funding cycles are very long, so it wasn't like as soon as we got to use this tool, I was able to ask for all this money for infrastructure upgrades to achieve savings. So those requests come in now, and I maybe get funded for them a year or 2 from now. So most of these savings came from behavior and operational changes, which we have to see how easy it is to sustain those over time. So I was careful in my management not to say like, we're already at a win, or we're almost there and we're done, because I know it's harder to sustain those. But the total cost savings for those, if we had actually used as much as we did before, was about $450,000. And I know this is an energy call, but you might be interested in waste as well. Our waste goal was to reduce landfill capacity by 5% by 2021. And it was really hard for us to kind of understand what we'd be able to do with access to the information. So it was almost like kind of I went really conservative because it was kind of hard to know what we'd be able to do with the tool. But we actually in the first year reduced it by 14%. And it was about $122,000 savings. So I'm confident we're going to be able to hold those, but definitely the ability to manage waste, especially as we have new zero waste goals has been really important and will continue to be. So I will end there. I see some questions coming in, but I've been busy talking. So I don't know if you want to kind of start to go through those, or I'll let you manage that.
Yeah, Elliot has been organizing those, so thanks so much. So I just have one question before we kick it off to all the questions that have come in. So it sounds like you've saved this $450,000 in the first year. Do you feel like that's the tip of the iceberg, or do you feel like that's you've done a lot of stuff in terms of operational and behavior savings, and you just want to sustain it? Do you feel where's sort of the balance of that? And I know you have a lot of capital projects you also want to fund.
Yeah, no, I think we've just hit the tip of the iceberg. I mean, even the behavioral change programs I showed you with the winter break 34,000, that wasn't even in all buildings. That was in a percentage of the buildings. So every day we're learning new things about, how we can change scheduling, how we can, which I think are going to have huge impacts for us moving forward. So I really think we've just hit the tip of the iceberg, and I've started to, get projects in as I've seen them kind of reveal themselves over the last year. And so I'm hoping, in the next probably 2 or 3 fiscal year cycles, we'll start to see more of the infrastructure kind of project changes. But I think we've got a lot of more room to. I've always been very moved by. I don't know if you guys have seen the California State of California energy efficiency chart since Title 24 was in place, and basically, they show California's energy usage flatlining at a certain point due to the code requirements, and I aim to have a chart like that. So.
Or actually decrease, yeah.
Yeah.
So we have only 7 minutes left. I'm going to turn it over to Elliot to get through some of the great questions that have come in.
Thanks, Hannah, and thanks, Kristen. I'll try and get through these quick fire. First one was not even a question, just somebody in all caps writing, "This is awesome, great job." And I think many people feel the same way. But in terms of the questions, first, how are you getting students to care about this data on an everyday basis? Are you finding that certain majors are more interested and motivated than others?
Definitely, there are some majors more interested than others, and also freshmen tend to be more interested than others as well, and undergraduates as a whole tend to be more interested than graduate students. So